Hello, everyone. I am Malika J. Stevely, author of Song of Redemption, and I have the pleasure to speak with Mr. Clifford St. Laurent, a technical consultant for the Song of Redemption audiobook. And he's going to tell us a little bit about Louisiana Creole, also known as Kouri-Vini. Did I say that correctly?
That's pretty
Okay. I'm
good.
just making sure. Very grateful to have Cliff here. And Cliff, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. And first, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to work on this project too. So, bonjour vous autres. Mon nom c'est Clif Saint-Laurent. Clif Saint-Laurent. Moi, sorti à Baton Rouge. Ça, c'est la capitale de l'État de la Louisiane. Moi, j'étais né et élevé là-bas. Uh, mais ouais. Hi, I'm Clif St. Laurent. I am a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's the capital city of Louisiana. And I was born and raised there.
You've done a lot in the arts. You're in Los Angeles right now. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
Really easier to say what I don't do.
Okay.
um, well,
What
I'm a
don't you do?
multi, right, yeah. Primarily, I work as I'm a vocalist and an actor in the music and film, but I also work behind the scenes as well. So I'm a vocal coach and a music educator, new producer as well. I produced the first film. Actually, I was one of the producers on that film. That was actually first film in Louisiana Creole completely, but it's the first film that's been done in the language. I'm also a producer of a show that will be coming out, I believe, this year with PBS. PBS LPB, Louisiana Public Broadcasting, which is a subsidiary of PBS. I'm a music director as well, composer and arranger. I just do and a dancer and a piano player. So I do everything when it comes to the
Wow.
arts.
That's fascinating. What's the name of the film that's coming out?
The film is already out. It released in March of last year, 2023, and it's called Tom Boo. I don't know if the director has any. I know he's got some ideas for distribution. So right now, the only place you would be able to find it is if we come to a neighborhood near you and do a screening of it right now. But there's talks of distribution at play right now.
That's exciting. The PBS show, do you know when that's going to be released?
Not yet. We're in the post-production part of it right now. There's still some things linguistically that has to be done because it does center around Kouri-Vini as well. And so we just have a team. I can give you the premise of that show is really an educational series where I go around the various areas of Creolophone and Francophone Louisiana, and I'm speaking with Louisiana Creoles. The goal is to take these interviews and create video lessons that will air in 8 episodes that'll get you a foundational knowledge of how to speak the language.
I look forward to seeing that. That's awesome. You are a big advocate of making sure that culture as well as the language of Kouri-Vini. I know that also been a lot of there's been a lot of questions and debate for as long as I can remember around the discussion of what is Louisiana Creole and what's the difference between, or is there a difference between Louisiana Creole and Kouri-Vini? Can you explain what that is?
The term Kouri-Vini has come into recent popularity, and that's been actually because of the work of my good friend and colleague, Dr. Christophe Landry, and myself. The term Kouri-Vini has always been a term that is used to colloquially to describe Louisiana Creole. So Kouri-Vini is a synonym for Louisiana Creole, or more appropriately, Kouri-Vini is the way that we refer to the language of Louisiana Creole in the language. Now, not everyone uses that term. That term comes from a particular area in the Bayou Teche, so it wasn't widely known, but as advocates and cultural activists, we made a collective decision for various reasons, which I'm sure we might get into, but for various reasons to promote the usage of Kouri-Vini rather than Louisiana Creole. I kind of use them together, but they mean the same thing. I think though what you may be referring to is the confusion between what is the difference between Kouri-Vini / Louisiana Creole and Louisiana French. So you do have 3 Latin-based languages that are spoken in Louisiana that have been spoken there for hundreds of years, Kouri-Vini being the oldest ones that have been spoken there. It is true that there is a lot of confusion around Louisiana French versus Louisiana Creole. Confusion comes from, first, most people are just not linguists. They don't really know language. All they know is this person said bonjour and that person said bonjour, and it all sounds the same, right? So Kouri-Vini does use an overwhelming amount of French vocabulary. We estimate, although I don't know how accurate we can get, but we estimate between 85% and 95% of the vocabulary of Kouri-Vini being finding its etymology in French. The grammar structure, however, and the syntax is different than French. When we talk about what constitutes a language, we can't just look at vocabulary, because if we just looked at vocabulary, English would be a dialect of German, or all of the Latin languages that we know, all of the Romance languages, French, Italian, Spanish, all of those languages would be classified as Latin if that were the case, but that's not. So Kouri-Vini has a very distinctive grammar from French. It has rules. It can be spoken incorrectly. A lot of the confusion also comes in, this is probably the main thing, because you have a case where, and I don't know that this is unique to Louisiana Creoles and Louisianians, but what you find is that people in Louisiana tend to identify their language by their chosen ethnic or cultural identity. And so a person who oftentimes, especially of the older generation, a person who identifies as Louisiana Creole may call what they speak Creole, when in fact, linguistically, what they're speaking is French. And then you have the same thing with Cajun identified people. There are a lot of Cajun identified people who actually speak Kouri-Vini, Louisiana Creole, but because they identify as Cajuns, and Cajuns are assumed to speak French, they call their language Cajun French. And so this is why we felt that the distinction was important to make nomenclature, right? Because it alleviates all of that type of confusion, and now you're just calling the language linguistically what it is.
Okay. Now, about how many people do you believe to still speak the language fluently?
That is another one that is just impossible to answer. I can give you what linguists have said and research that's been done. The numbers typically are said to be between 5,000 and 10,000. But one of the reasons that is so tricky to know is because of what I just told you. You'll have some people who say that they speak Louisiana Creole, but they actually speak French. That's one reason. And then another reason is that there's still, for the older generation, there's still a stigma around speaking this language. For many years, many moons, we were told that, or our ancestors rather, our elders were told that you were uneducated and you needed to learn to speak English in order to have a proper education, in order to be respected, in order to fit into society. You had to decreolize and Americanize. And so many people who speak the language oftentimes will not tell you that they do. And they damn sure, excuse my French, won't speak in front of you in a lot of cases.
Interesting. Now, I did, about a number of months ago, I actually spoke with a few older folks who spoke the language. And I did learn from them that when they were in school, they weren't allowed to speak it, or else they would be punished. They went to Catholic school, and the nuns would punish them if they spoke what they called Louisiana Creole. And how is it that you learned the language? Was it your family who taught you, or how did that become?
I wish my family had taught me, but I see now the greater purpose of how I actually got the language. No, my family has been a couple of generations removed from the language, but I always knew it was there. And nobody else in my family really cared to learn, but I felt personally robbed of an important, dare I say, even integral part of our history and our culture and who we were. So I made the decision to learn it. And, so this would have been in your late 90s and early 2000s. I took every resources that I could find. There were only really resources that were done in the 30s and the 40s, and we see a lot of racism attached to it. It was called, excuse my French again, nigger French. It's referred to that these ways in these books. But what was crazy is a lot of those books approach Kouri-Vini through the lens of French speakers. So in order to learn it, I had to also teach myself French. So I started learning French at the same time. And, you know, that's one of the culture's languages too. So I eventually decided to learn French as well and commit to it, and did so, and so that I could speak Louisiana French. But yeah, so I started with those. I actually started with Haitian Creole because I didn't know that there was a difference. But I think I learned about 3 or 4 months in to speaking it, to learning it, not the same language. And then the most reliable source I came upon after that was actually work from, again, my friend, Dr. Christophe Landry. Dr. Debbie Clifton, she's an associate professor at University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And she was teaching a course that's actually a Creole Studies program. And she was teaching a course in it. And he was working with her at the time. So they created a document to kind of outline what the course would look like. And that's what I used. And from then on, and then I would be in the library and other stuff. And funny story, my stepdad and I, we like to laugh about it now. I would be in every day after school, or if I didn't have work, I would go to the library and I'm studying, I'm reading, I'm learning. And I became very fluent in reading and writing and speaking very quickly. You know, I couldn't understand. But my stepfather would tell my mom, why do you let this boy keep going to this library, trying to learn this Creole stuff? This ain't gonna get him no money and blah, blah, blah. And so 20 years later, lo and behold, I'm producing films. Actually, the first job I got translating, because I do translations too a lot. It's a big part of my work. And the first job I did translating, which is about 15 or 17 years ago somewhere, landed me a $5,000 check. And so
nice.
He came to me and he said, no, Clif, I will never, when you say you can do something, I'll never doubt you again. So.
I mean, he should have known just that amount of dedication. I mean, that's amazing. That's what I was going to ask. Like, how did your family receive you know, studying and learning about, learning French, learning about Kouri-Vini and Haitian Creole?
Man, my mom, listen, oh, wow. Alice, my mom's name is Alice, and she is so supportive. She is the best mom I could ask for. And she's and I'm an only child. She's bragging about her baby. Here I am about to be 40 years old. I'm still gonna be her baby. So she's constantly telling people, anytime I go to class, yeah, she's go learn that Creole stuff from my son. You know, so she's blasting it all over. My aunt is another person. I'm really close with my mom and my aunt. They love that I was doing it. They didn't have the tenacity to do it, or really the will even. Mom she said she was going to come and sit us on some classes because I teach the language as well. So she hadn't come yet.
She'll get there, I'm sure.
She'll get there. Yeah.
So were there, so you said you went to the library and you found, you know, some resources. Were there any other books that, like, more recent books that you found or anything?
All of the recent stuff I'm connected to in a way. I think the only book that I'm connected to indirectly through my colleagues is the Clif Creole, which came out of, I forget when the most recent edition came out, but that is, the author of that book is Nathan Wente. That style of book meant it's a primer. So it's a primer on the Louisiana Creole language, right? And so he used and slightly modified the orthography or writing system, which I'm a member of. There were 3 of us who created the modern day writing system, myself, Dr. Landry, and Michael Gisclair, with some contributions from Eric Gaither, who is out of Texas. He also is the owner of Mo Creole, if you ever see that brand or any flag. He sells a lot of the flags. And then Dr. Oliver Mayu, who was working at Cambridge. And so the 3 of us, with those contributions from the other 2, we created that orthography. So everything that you see coming out today, kind of a product of the work I've done, along with some other great minds.
That's fantastic. Now, I think you kind of touched on it earlier, but are there different dialects of Louisiana Creole? If there is that a part of the regional? I can't put my words together, so I apologize.
No, it's okay. No.
Working on fumes here, 3 hours of sleep.
Oh, we are. I got you. So, all right, good. I guess this is a good time to break down, because a lot of times these are all linguistic terms, and a lot of times just as lay people, sometimes we just don't use them the way they're used in the field, right? A dialect is a variety of a particular language. So we have a dialect of English here that's spoken in the US as a dialect of English spoken in the UK, in Australia, and so on. So again, in Louisiana, you have 3 Latin-based languages. You don't hear about the Spanish too much, but there is a variety of Spanish, or a dialect of Spanish, that kind of came up in Louisiana. You have Louisiana French, and you have Louisiana Creole, or Kouri-Vini. We can identify at least 2 dialects of Kouri-Vini that are spoken in Louisiana, and they are regional. Then one for sure so we call them pretty much the river parishes, the river parish dialect, which is you're going to find areas closer to New Orleans, even out a little bit out West Baton Rouge Parish. Can't talk right now. So Pointe-Coupee, that entire community, that parish outside of Louisiana, the North Shore region, Chafonta, around Slidell. Those are river parish regions. St. James Parish as well, we're Vacherie, Louisiana. So you'll find that the Kouri-Vini spoken out there is noticeably different from the Bayou Teche region, even though they're mutually intelligible, but they're the same language, but different dialects. I'm trying to think of an appropriate difference. Almost as different as, pronunciation. You find, I don't know why this is coming, but I know in Detroit, the word, I don't know why I'm thinking about that, but the word, they don't say car, they say car, So differences like that, difference in intonation, tonality, the way they, and then some vocabulary changes when you go to these regions as well.
Okay. Now, I did hear that what type of Creole, but I had heard that Creole originated in Alabama. Could you tell us whether that is true or false?
So what you have happening is that Mobile, Alabama was the first capital of Louisiana. Now, I'm a little rusty right now as to where the Bienville, the first governors of Louisiana, there was Antoine Lemoine, Bienville, and then Iberville, his brother. I don't remember where the first permanent settlement was. It may be Alabama, but I'm a little shaky right now on that. That would make sense that you would see it there, because that's where they would have started, cultivating the settlement first. But what we're talking about is that Alabama at that time was a part of Louisiana, and so were parts of Mississippi. So yeah, I should have researched that one before, but yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, just everything that you had said in terms of Mobile, Alabama, because a lot of people don't necessarily know that. They don't know that Alabama was a part of Louisiana to begin with.
First capital, Mobile, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for that. Who speaks Creole today? Is it, Black people, white people, Latinos, or just who would I see speaking Creole or hear speaking Creole?
Well, Creoles are in many ways Latinos. It's something else maybe we could talk about too at some point, of how we were able to successfully use the census records, which actually we probably should talk about, because that's a lot of the work that you're seeing, that you're talking about, is a direct reaction of the 2010 census. But so Creoles are Latinos in that the word Latino simply means Latin in Spanish, right? And our culture is a Latin-based culture. Now, talking about racial demographics, Creole is spoken by people who identify both as white and as Black. And then there are some people who don't, who disidentify with racial categories, who simply call themselves Creole or Cajun. I would say that it is likely, while there is an overwhelming, I shouldn't say overwhelming, I don't know that to be true, but there is a significant portion of white people, or white identified people, or people who we would identify as white. There is a significant portion who do speak Kouri-Vini. People of color, Black people, Black identified people, Creoles of color, as we were called at one time, we probably make up the majority of the people who do speak it today.
Okay. Now, for those who don't know, what is, in terms of people, who are the Cajuns and who are the Creoles and who are the Creoles of color? What does that makeup look like?
So, a lot of people are gonna get mad at this, but Cajuns are Creoles who heavily identify with Acadian ancestry. Cajun was a term that for many years was always derogatory, and it referred to anyone who was French and or Creole speaking and poor, low class, third tier society. But it finds its etymology in the term Acadian because the refugees who were expelled from what is today Nova Scotia, Acadie, that Acadie actually still exists, but the refugees who were expelled from there, when they found themselves in Louisiana, many were poor, but not all of them were. They quickly gained a reputation by white Creole elites and even Creoles of color, elite Creoles of color, free people. They quickly gained the reputation of being low-class people. That's how Cajun got started. Now, it's got to be noted that by the time the last of the Acadians arrived, and they came in waves, by the time that the last group of them arrived in Louisiana, they only made up, well, they didn't even make up 1/4 of the population. It was somewhere between 2,900, close to 3,000 people. That's total. Now, the population of Louisiana at the time was teetering along the lines of 11,000, somewhere around there. So they didn't even make up 1/4 of the population. So if we do the math today, and all of the other people who would come in even greater numbers than they would come, you know, you had the Saint Domingue Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, where all of these people are coming between 1791 and 1815, and they came in even greater numbers after. So we can safely say that there is not much Acadian presence. There was a massive campaign that happened in the 60s in order to reclaim, say that loosely because that's kind of some other people's language who were directly involved with that movement, but to reclaim the Cajun culture and beautify it. And so today we see a result of the work that happened with Jimmy DeMongeau and Codofil. Codofil is le Conseil pour le développement du français en Louisiane, or the Council of Development for French in Louisiana. And so, yeah, they started a successful campaign. Cajuns today are typically white identified people who are French speaking or come from French speaking backgrounds and or Creole speaking backgrounds as well. But I say that to say that it's just got to be said that because this is where they might get with what I just said, but this is where people are going to have a problem. But it's true. There's no such thing as Cajun culture. Everything that we experience in Louisiana when we're talking about, even linguistically, even the French that we speak, it's a creolized phenomenon. The cuisine, none of that stuff came from there. All of that stuff came together and boiled in a good old pot, like a gumbo, in Louisiana, which is the very definition of Creole. So Cajuns participate in Louisiana Creole culture. Cajuns are a part of it in that way, in that they inherited it when they got here and learned and became a part of it. So, but people who do identify as Cajun, sometimes they have Acadian ancestry, sometimes they don't.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what's the difference between Creoles and Creoles of color?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I can go on. Sometimes you have to say, well, slow down. But...
No, this is all good stuff. I'm just soaking it in. Thank you for this.
Yeah. So Creole historically in Louisiana, as it was used, always meant born in the colony. So if you were born in the colony, you were Creole, whether you were enslaved or whether you were free, whether you were whether you were black or white, which are how we term those things today. So Creoles of color would be people who had varying degrees of African ancestry. They weren't really quantified, though. I know we like to think a lot of those terms like mulatto and Reef and Métis in Louisiana. People think of those as being blood quantities of how much African you had in your blood, but that's not true. And Dr. Landry was able to prove that in his doctoral thesis. So yeah, Creoles of color just simply were people who had a degree of African ancestry or ancestry that wasn't fully European. There was no necessarily cultural difference. A lot of them even worship sometime in the same Catholic, many Creoles, as you may know, and are still today Catholic. And so there were a few places where they even attended church together. So, you have a cultural, they shared a culture in that way. Now, there is something to be said, though, about the treatment because they still weren't as equal, of course, as white Creoles. You have the famous Le Code Noir, the Black Code, which did govern what free people of color were able to do and what they weren't able to do. And so, yeah, that's really the difference. We're just making a racial distinction in a way. Code Noir, which is famous, and it made a lot of impositions, that people of color had to abide by. So when we're talking about Creoles versus white Creole versus Creoles of color was just a term that described that people had various degrees of African ancestry. Today we say Black. I hesitate to use that in this historical context because they weren't termed that. Right. Today we see it that way, which is fine, but they were called Creoles of color at the time. So that's all it meant, but Black Creoles or mixed race Creoles.
Okay. And mixed race being having African ancestry and French ancestry?
Anything. A lot of people think that, to be Creole, you had to have a certain mixture or a certain degree. That was not it at all. You have some people who had no or little European ancestry. Creoles come from especially Creoles of color, will come from the darkest of dark and the lightest of light, which is the common misconception. So yeah, It had nothing to do with racially. And that's what I was just kind of speaking to. We say that to put it in a context of how we think today as primarily Anglophone Americans. Those notions kind of make sense to us. You didn't have that same dynamic during these times we're talking about. As a matter of fact, there was a newspaper article or posting that I have in one of them, and I can forward it to you. I believe it was in 1816. This is the time where, Louisiana has just become a part of the United States in 1812. And there's still this dynamic that Anglo-Americans, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, could not understand how it is that someone who looks like me is a Creole in 1816 in Louisiana, and also someone who looks like, Cameron Diaz is also a Creole. I'm just the liliest white person I can think of. So how is that they are Creole? So to the WASP, they're saying, aha, you, Cameron Diaz, must be saying that you have some African ancestry, because it's just the nature of Anglo-Saxons, Anglophones, let me use that term. That's the term I want to use. It's the nature of Anglophones to see things in this binary without there not being anything in between. You're either Black or you're white. And so what was happening at the time where the white Creoles were saying, well, no, we're not. We're all Creole, sure. Clif, he's dark-skinned, he's Creole. Hi, I'm Cameron Diaz, and I'm white, and I'm Creole as well. But Anglos just could not wrap their minds around how we were able to share an identity, even if it's just a name, and to an extent a culture without there being a distinguishable difference. And so to them, that just simply meant that Cameron Diaz was saying that she got some African ancestry. Now they were about to get lumped in the same category as Black people. And so the white Creole response was, okay, let's not go that far. We're not saying that we have African ancestry. Part of it was, a lot of it was also because they didn't want to identify with them, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, because they were French and they were Catholic, and they had a heavy disdain for them. And as a matter of fact, so what ended up happening was they wanted to disassociate themselves with this notion because now the American idea is starting to become the popular idea. It's starting to become the consensus. It's the status quo in society now. And so they can't really fight against that. So if you can't beat them, join them. So what they tried to do, disassociate Black Creoles and Creoles of color from being able to be Creole. They tried to take us out the category. You can't be Creole anymore, because they wanted to still be able to be white identified, but still distinguish themselves as different from the Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They tried to take the term Creole, and they saw, we weren't letting it go. Go tell your grandma she ain't Creole and see how it happens. You know what I mean? That's just not gonna work, especially for Black Creole. So eventually, and this kind of ties back into the Cajun thing. So eventually, this is another reason why so many identify as Cajuns today too, because they still wanted to remain distinct from white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and English speaking, but they still wanted to retain some form of of Frenchiness. So at least there was this term Cajun. Sure, it meant that we were this, it meant we were poor and all that, but at least it implied that we were white.
Thank you for breaking that down, because I remember trying to explain that to a number of people, and and kind of like what you said too, just that need for some of the Europeans to categorize people, not just, by color, but by, so many other, variations of this or subcategories. So I appreciate you for breaking that down.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
I had a few other questions for you.
Okay.
But I think you actually touched on all of them. What I did want to know also was, why is it so important for you to basically reclaim this culture and the survival of the Creole language? Why is that so important to you?
Thanks for that question. Language, culture, period. And a lot of times we bifurcate, we tend to split language and culture. Language is culture. And in my opinion, language is the foundation, it's the cornerstone and the building block of culture. So it's important to me to make sure that this is maintained and preserved, because it informs who we are. It informs who we have been. In many ways, it can inform our future. There were recipes and things were shared down in this language, and they likely became a little watered down when they started to be passed down in English. Languages carry with them a soul, and that soul, once you take away that piece of the soul, you've effectively taken away a piece of yourself, a piece of once was. Let me see if I can be a little bit more clear and not speak so colorful. We come from a place where many of our ancestors that we have access to, were they still living, we would have access to them. Many of them did not speak this language. So their best attempt to communicate with us would be through what some might refer to as broken English, right? I think it does us a disservice to forget about, to not learn about what their experience was like. I think we'd find if we learn what their experience was like, large part of it is connected to this language, right? You mentioned the people that you talked to who were beaten in school. There were people who were ridiculed for speaking this language, but it also informs ways that we think. It also informs our worldview, our scope. Creoles don't see the world the same way as Anglos do, and vice versa. It doesn't make one better than the other. It's just a different experience. And if we're to ever really truly understand ourselves, I think it would behoove us to understand things about our past. And language is directly embedded into that. And then again, it's just a jewel that is being washed away. It's a jewel that's being tarnished, it's dying out because people are forgetting. And because we gravitated towards being something else other than what we were. I think for those there's several things I can say. I can put it into context too. But here's a very real life example of how it's helpful, even in the sphere of education. Louisiana has consistently been rated amongst the top 2 worst states for education. Maybe if we're lucky, we get down to the top 3, and that's been consistent. That's because, in large part, people don't understand the unique linguistic situation of Louisiana. They think, oh, okay, 1812, Louisiana became a part of the state. All right, everybody's American now. Everybody's speaking English. Everybody's doing things the same way around the United States, period. That's the assumption. But you have, in our case, where many of us, I'm sure you have a grandparent, at most a great-grandparent, who could not speak English. And that's the case for many people, even my age. They have been in the room with their elders who could not speak English. So what do you think that does? That passes down to the next generation in some form. There's a phenomenon known as transference in linguistics. And it's basically where a grammatical feature usually, of the language that was once widely spoken, the language that was most prevalent, that feature passes down in the new language, which is now English. And so, I promise you I'm gonna tie it together. Here's an example of that. I had a friend and her mom doesn't speak Creole, but they would love when I come over because her mom did, the grandmother did, and I would talk to her. Now, the mom, and she was maybe in 60s, 70s at this point, and this is just a few years ago, they were talking about after a hurricane had come down and these trees these branches had fallen on the roof. And she was just telling the story about how, yeah, it's so bad. The guys had to go up on top of there. And she said the guys had to go and get the branches off them roof. Now, if you're somewhere coming from the Midwest, they haven't been exposed to people who speak English with a Creole or French or grammar in their mind, or anywhere else outside of Louisiana, if you're from there, you would listen to this woman and think she's ignorant. You would think she's undereducated. Oh my God, did you not go to school? And then there's younger people who talk like that too. But someone like me, who knows my community, who speaks the language, who knows how we speak in the language, and who knows how we think when we're speaking in English, I see that what she just did was she used a feature of French. Because if you take a table, in French, the word is table, right? If you say the table, you say la table. But if you say the tables and you make it plural, the only thing that changes is that article, la becomes les tables. But there's no audible difference in table. So you don't say les tables. What she did was exactly what we do in both French and in Kouri-Vini. She said dem roof. She could have said the roof, which would mean one roof, but she was talking about multiple roofs. So what did she do? She changed the article from the to dem. And the dem is all we needed to inform us that there were multiple of something. So dem roof. That is a classic example of what's happening in education with our children in these, especially in the rural areas. They may not necessarily speak Kouri-Vini fluently, the language. They may not speak French, the language, but they're thinking with that grammar and using English words, and they don't know. And so you have these teachers that come in who speak proper or formal or standard English, and they think that the kids are just uneducated. But no, you don't understand that the root cause is that they're not thinking in English. So this is why language is important.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're going to pivot a little bit because
Okay.
I know that you've been doing some work in South Carolina.
Okay.
Now, what have you been doing in Charleston recently?
So myself and two of my colleagues, Dr. Oliver Mayu, who I spoke of earlier, and also Adrian Guillory Chapman, who's also was involved in the TV Creole. I was invited, and we were invited to go and speak to community leaders who are trying to hold on to the Gullah Geechee language and also trying to find ways to validify more in the minds of the community, both their community, the people who speak it, the people who grew up speaking it, and also the wider community at large, that it becomes respected. One of the authors of our orthography or writing system, they invited me and also Dr. Mayu, who worked on it as well. So we went to give a talk to speak with the community to find out what their needs were, find out what the situation was, and give them pointers and some support in how to go about creating a viable, pragmatic orthography writing system so that they can use and pass on and also instill pride in their people with the language. They have the Bible that was done by a group of them who I even met with, actually, which is really cool to see and read that. So they're looking for now how to go to the next steps to structure it and make it something that people can use going forward in an official capacity.
That's very interesting work that you're describing. Interesting is not even the best word for it. I'm very in tune with everything that's happening right now in South Carolina. My husband is actually from like the Okatee, Bluffton area of South Carolina. So I'm hearing and seeing some of the things that are happening with the Gullah Geechee people. I'm more in tune with it than some of my family or in-laws over there, just because, it's, I see that their culture is being taken away little by little. And I recently came across a Bible that you were just speaking of. And so that's the only, I'm sorry, I can't think right now. That's the only thing that I've seen written. Yeah, the record that I've seen, which I'm sure there's more, but that was the first and the only that I've seen thus far. And so from that, I remember thinking, is there more, and what are they doing to cultivate this, or to hold on to this language and the culture and everything? So I know I'm very grateful for, your assistance with that as well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I'm not very articulate today. I'm
Oh
telling you,
no.
I'm working on 3 hours of sleep here.
I'm right there with you. Look, this interview was on my mind. I feel like I think I woke up at 5 this morning. I ain't gonna sleep yet either. So like, trying to make sure I got all my ducks in a row. You know how that goes.
Can you tell us, like, I know that you teach Kouri-Vini, and do you know when the next class will be so that others can join you and
Absolutely.
Get some
Actually,
more learning, as they say.
Yeah, get some more learning. Yeah, like my grandma would say, let me learn you something, boy. Yeah, actually, my new semester, the winter 23-24, just started this past Sunday. So I teach it. It's always typically on a Sunday. Typically, I know people do their church thing, and so it's for some people it's late enough, and but yeah, it goes over well. So it's an 8-week course. It's 2 hours per class per lesson, and so yeah, the next one, I believe the next first level, I teach a beginner level and then an intermediate level, and I believe I'm gonna start the next one in March, but I don't know, depending on when this airs, they're free to reach out. I allow people to join if they only missed the first class, because they still have a lot of time to catch up. So yeah, but I'll keep you posted on when the next one is.
Thank you. How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, anybody can email me. Mr. spelled out, so it's mister.laurent@gmail.com. That's mr.saint.laurent@gmail.com. I'm changing all that over this year. I'm going to make it a lot easier for people to get in touch with me specifically about the class. I think there's going to be a website coming soon where you can just register for the class right there to make it a lot easier. Otherwise, people can follow me on Instagram at I am Clif St. Laurent. Clif is spelled with one F, CLIFSTLAURENT. So I am Clif St. Laurent.
Thank you. And I'll put all that information up as well for people to see. I do appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the education. It's so invaluable, and you just have no idea how much I am very grateful for everything. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. And also congratulations on this project. I cannot wait to listen. I'm especially excited to hear the audio version of it too. So thanks.
Thank you.